This is the first episode of Pratik Critique. The concept of this episode is that I want to give critiques to people who have asked for it, especially because a lot of you have already seen the retouching series, and I actually want to take some time to thank you first of all for checking it out, and also for being part of my group, Photoshop with Pratik, and actually spend time critiquing your images and showing how to improve them, what I like about them, what I don't like about them, and I'm going to be having a lot more of these going on continually, so please feel free to stay in tune on future submission opportunities, either in my group, Instagram, or my personal Facebook page, or with Sue Bryce's education community, which I'm also highly interactive with. So let's get into it and show you the first round of Pratik Critique. The first image we have in front of us is by Alastair Bakker, and I love this image because it's actually done really well, and it starts a precedence quite high considering how many images we have to do today. So the first thing that I want to commend Alastair on is going to be the skin work. It's beautifully done. I love the transitions, the texture. There's a couple of things that I would fix in addition to, and I'm going to actually set a new layer here and use a pen or a brush and then set it to black or white and do some markups as we go. First thing is going to be the fact that I mentioned before, the skin's really well done. I love the texture, it's beautiful. There's a couple of areas here. Number one, the transition here is a little bit too harsh. I noticed that between the makeup here and then the fall off here going towards the chin, there's some harsh areas that needs to be fixed. Some dodging and burning could fix it up quite easily. For example, if I put a dodge layer here, and again, all this is from the retouching series. In case you have it or don't have it, you can get these actions located in that. I would actually go ahead and start dodging a little bit, especially on these harder transition. Or you could do a touch of frequency separation if you're not pushing it too far, and and you should be able to get away with it. I'm just doing some dodge work here to give you an idea of what's happening. You can see what I'm talking about. Just a few strokes here can lighten up those transitions nicely. I can also add a burn layer here and then fix a little bit more of those transitions where the bright spots are. And what that does ultimately is just makes a nice fall off going from dark to light. Right? So when I turn these two on and off at the same time, you see what I'm talking about. Next, what I would also probably do is a little bit more healing work. There's some spots located here along the cheek. So I'll go ahead and heal those out. The next thing I would also contemplate is over here in the middle where the bridge is, there's a couple of little stray hairs that I would also clean up. And I'm just using a blank layer with my healing brush. And again, I'm not going to emphasize so much on what techniques I'm doing and the settings and such, because that all is covered in my series in depth, and I just want to spend time on focusing on results. So that's number one. The second thing that I would also consider along this area is going to be the nose. There's some spots along the nose here that I would fix. I could also use a clone brush and brush away some of that as well. I think that would be really handy. And I would soften up the texture here with the clone brush technique that I mentioned as well. And then also some of the spots here and some of the hairs on the nose too. Let me just go ahead and use my regular brush. I'm set to black and just mark up some of those little bits that I would take away. Okay, so after that, the biggest thing that I would also fix is going to be a couple of additional flyaways. Number one is you have a couple here. Then you have a couple of distracting ones up top. So I wouldn't do too many. I wouldn't go crazy with it, but I think a little bit of cleanup would help accentuate the image. Also, there's some spots along the forehead that I would fix. And then, most importantly, is going to be this area here. I would consider actually lightening it up or using the clone brush technique again to kind of even that out so that the way the transitions from the forehead to the eyebrow isn't so intense. What's happening is that the actual eyebrow itself, the pencil liner, is filling it in a bit too much, and what's giving me the illusion of just being, I guess, overly dark where it shouldn't be. Instead, I would actually draw in some of the hairs, and I would use the same techniques that I'd use for eyelashes to draw in a little bit more hairs along the top here. So aside from that, I like it a lot. The other reason that I would, focus on these bits is to bring attention back on the face. So it's not focused so much on these little areas that are catching the light. And last but not least, I noticed that over here, there's some redness along the actual neck. And I would actually go and fix that. I would make sure that the tones themselves match the face a little bit more so that you're not seeing a lot of redness. And again, there's a tutorial specifically on unifying skin tones that would do quite well. Another really great technique here is if I actually ran the oversaturation mask action, you can see the action itself tones that down, and I can add this into a group and put a mask on that. Let's see, put a mask on that, and then convert it to black, make sure it's in the group itself. So that way now I can brush specifically just along that area. And what happens is any areas that are oversaturated get toned down, and it makes a world of difference, especially across the range of different saturations. So again, this is all part of the actions as I mentioned. So aside from that, taking a look at some of these key features that are outlined, everything else to me looks really great, and I'm really proud of what you've done. Great, so let me exit that. Let's go to our next image here. Our next image is by Alison Armstrong from Dallas, Texas. And I know this because of the title itself. Now, Alison, I think this image is really good because it illustrates a couple of things that I've been noticing with makeup recently, in that there's some makeup foundations out there or tones that seem to reflect a lot more white than necessary, or sometimes subjects use makeup that might be a little bit different in terms of the color it pronounces to the camera. So what happens is in the camera you get a different saturation level in comparison to what's in person. And easily enough, what I would do here is focus on the saturation levels of the face. The skin itself, I think, needs a little bit more work. For example, along these blemishes here that you see along the face. I'm just going to draw on the image really quickly to illustrate some of these points I'm talking about. Right, some of these little dots and flyaways. But what I would do is add a little bit more saturation and color towards the face. You can either use the color fix layer, or you can use a unifying skin tone tutorial that I have as well, which basically talks about using like gradient maps for the skin. And once you do that, it should easily just fix up and make sure the skin tone itself is uniform. The rest of the skin actually seems pretty decent. There's not a lot I would do. There's some areas on the chest, some flyaways, things like that I would probably fix as well. And then the rest is all personal preference. However, with those couple of fixes and these little flyaways here that seem to be poking out, you're good to go. And then also, if you want to consider some of these adjustments on the teeth, should they have like food in their teeth or something, always be aware of that. And that again is done by the healing brush. Pretty straightforward once you've seen how to do that. I'd also maybe even consider darkening some of the eyebrow. You know, these things are funny because once you start looking at the image, you start noticing things more than before. And then it takes some time to register before you actually see some of these key problems. And this is normal because, you might have to look at an image a few times before seeing everything that's possible. If you're ever stuck on an image where you're not sure what to do, then I would leave it as is, because if you're trying to hunt for things to do, then chances are you're just trying to find things to fix that don't need to be fixed. That's my rule of thumb here. Okay, so aside from that, it looks pretty good. Thank you so much, Alison, for sending that image in. Let's go to our next one. Our next one is by Andrea Fine. And this is actually really interesting because I noticed that the skin itself is still a little blotchy, in the sense that, let me actually turn this into black and white for a minute here to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm going to use my black and white helper layer here. I'm going to quickly run my dodge and burn actions so that I can just show you exactly what I mean. Now, I think the skin is a little bit overdone in the sense that I see some patchiness and I see some texture being lost along the way. I'm not sure if it's texture being lost, but I do see some texture inconsistency. So I'm just assuming that texture was lost and and translate it or transplant it differently than what it was on the original image. But let's say we talk about just dodge and burn here. I'm going to dodge and burn a little bit just to give you an idea of the areas that I'm focused on when I'm talking about blotchiness. So I'm going to dodge a little first. Let's bring my flow back down to 1%. And I'm going to be dodging just a touch. Just a touch. I don't know what I'm saying right now. Okay. Just a touch. And when I turn these on and off, you see how the texture becomes much more fluid and the patchiness seems to go away. If I continue doing that across the face, you'll see exactly what I mean here. And again, I understand this is something that does take time to master. But once you take a look at videos like this where you see people actually correcting what you've done and showing you what they're seeing, it really does help you to better become proficient at dodging and burning. And it helps you become better at seeing different areas that need to be fixed. And I think that's the biggest thing that you could do with learning retouching. So that's a lot better. So you see the chin hairs, I've dodged and burned that. That evens out that blotchy area. There are some areas across the face as well that need to be fixed, like this. But ultimately, I think what we could do is if we had the original file, we could just back off a little bit, get some of that original color tone in here, because I think some colors might have been spread around a little bit too much. And I'm just switching over my burn tool now. I'm going to be doing some bit more burn work. Going back to my dodge. Again, if you're not familiar with all these shortcuts and stuff I'm using, it's all in the retouching series, so I don't have to sit down and explain everything every single time I do it. Otherwise, we would be here for a very long time going through all these different options when I should be just critiquing. Let's also go to the other side. I swear, like once I start retouching, it becomes really hard to stop just because I enjoy it so much and I want to see things perfect. And with time comes a lot of the ability to see as well as feeling confident in doing so. And I think just like learning anything new, just doing it and starting to do it, even if you make mistakes, is okay. And that's the best way to learn. Even if you make mistakes, I've started learning video and I make mistakes all the time. And I think it's okay because even though it's not perfect, I end up learning a lot about myself and feeling more confident in doing it another time and again and again. It speeds up the whole process just by practicing and doing things again and again. And okay, so just like that, I've finished some of my dodge and burn. It's not perfect, but just to give you an idea of where I'm headed here visually, I think that's the best way to explain what's going on. And also it looks more consistent with the neck now. Again, you can also contour a little bit more if you wanted to because it's looking a bit more flat now. So I'd contour maybe on the edges of the face. And again, I would just continue doing that through the rest of the body. Through the rest of the face. But again, I think just take a look at the original file, see what happened to the texture because it looks a little bit soft up here. And it looks, you can see here, there's some reminiscence of the original texture. So I'd bring more of that back so that when you do dodge and burn, you end up with a lot of nice texture and not a lot of smoothness in the skin. But ultimately, I like that. I like this shot a lot in the sense of framing. And when you zoom out, it looks a lot better just by the dodge and burn work. And aside from that, I would again unify some skin tones by using that gradient map tutorial and just make sure that the skin colors from red to orange and so forth are more harmonious. All right, so let me exit that. Let's go to our next image. Thank you so much, Andrea. Angie Lewis has an image here, a fashion shot, which I think is actually beautifully done with the retouching. I love just from the offset, looking at it from a overhead view. The skin itself looks beautiful, texture's all there. There's not a ton to complain about, which is my job, I know, but there isn't. There's obviously some difference in tone, like the knee itself is a little bit red and the over here it's a little bit more yellow and saturated, so you could run the oversaturation mask and just mask in the foot area maybe. Shift the yellows to reds a little bit more. Another way to shift reds, yellows to reds as well is you could also go into, say, like your curves. And then I would go into my blue channel. So going down on the blue channel, it adds yellow or takes away blue. I'm going to add a little bit more blue, go to my red channel, and then I would, let's say, add a little bit more red maybe, just a touch. I can also go into like my green channel and take a little bit of green away. Then I would maybe mask it, and then I would probably, you know, just brush it in a little bit. And then once I brush it in, it's not perfect, but then I would actually go into each of these channels and tweak them so it's kind of better. And there you go. So you can see it went from yellow to more of like a neutral color. But I think personally, I would just use a gradient map to unify the skin tones. Okay, so the next thing I want to mention is one small thing here. This bottom left corner is catching my attention. So I would go ahead and actually take my burn, and then with a low flow here, I'm going to burn that down. Also on the top here, I would even out the gradation between the darkest part to the lightest part, so there's more consistency. There's a nicer fall off happening. And I'll do the same across the image. I would darken it up so it matches across the whole spectrum, and it just gives it a classier look. You can see how it went from really bright to really dark, and then when I burn that down, the transition's a lot cleaner. Same thing goes for this little patch over here. Let me go ahead and brighten that up just a touch. And there you go. So over here, I went from having an image that is quite nice to being much better just by switching up the background. Aside from that, I might clone out the crease here on the dress in the front just to give it more of a nice look. It's catching a lot of attention, the shadow especially. So I would tone that down maybe about 40% or so it matches the shadows on the rest of the dress. It's too sharp at the moment. Aside from that, really well done. I enjoyed it, and thank you so much, Angie. Next we have Carlos Dominguez. Now this image is actually interesting because one thing that stands out to me right away is going to be the highlights. I would actually tone down the highlights. For example, over here, I can see that based on the light setup, it could be that the highlights were catching a lot of the forehead and the under eyes and the nose. But what it's doing is it's actually bringing my attention to the forehead. And just based on the perspective that this was shot in, as well as the lens choice or the angle or the subject's position, the attention goes to the forehead. And attention also goes to the hair. The hair is turning gray. And you never want the hair to be gray. You want it to have specularity, but you don't want it to be so gray. So I think I'll actually go ahead and burn down the hair a little bit here so that you see highlights coming through, but it's not completely gray. And then I would use maybe, if you have your layers, to tone back down the highlights in case it's something you enhance further. And if it's something you didn't, I would just use frequency separation to blend that in a little bit more. Or just check out your raw file to see if it has more information in the highlights and mask that back in, opening up a second copy and bringing it into Photoshop to mask in. The skin itself is a little bit smooth, I think. I'm not too sure. I really do need to see the raw file in comparison, but the highlights are the biggest thing for me. And also maybe a little bit more work on the skin in terms of the chin area. There's some dots that I see along the side of the mouth here that I would take care of. And also the eyes themselves, I would probably clean up just a little bit more. Maybe with a regular brush tool, I'll just sample here and brush a little bit more to tone down the darkness, or dodge and burn, or anything that you prefer. Aside from that, maybe I'll clean up a little bit these flyaways that are coming down here. These little specks that are happening along the eyeshadow. And then that's pretty much it. All right, thank you so much, Carlos. The next image I have here is from Iwa. Now, Iwa actually did a really great job. I like this a lot. You can tell it's kind of like a headshot, a portrait. It could be used for many different things. It's very versatile. I do love the fact that, you know, there's some flyaways coming here. I would maybe tone a couple of these down, just the ones on top here. It does look frizzy to me. Personal preference again. But what I would also consider is filling in these gaps here. You could also burn that down too if you wanted to. You could also clone that. Oops, I'm using a black on black. Black brush on a black mask, never good. And then that should fill that in, or you could use a clone brush, as I mentioned, to kind of clone those gaps in. The next thing is, I think everything else looks pretty good to me, to be honest. Maybe there's some spots here that I would dodge and burn a little bit more to blend that over. So mostly dodging, so I'll go and do that right now. Obviously, I normally use a black and white adjustment layer to see what I'm looking at. But since this is a quick critique and you've seen me do that before, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but you get the idea. A couple of these little spots here that open that up. Also on the forehead, there's a couple of spots that I thought was really important that should probably be fixed. There's also going to be these little white spots here that I want to darken up. Again, you can also heal those out. It's not a huge deal. Many techniques would probably work, but I just like dodging burning a lot. What can I say? It's such a handy tool when you know how to use it. It feels really good when you do it properly. There you go. So aside from that, the eyebrows, the frizzy hairs, quite like it a lot. Thank you, Iwa. And I'll do a couple more, and then we'll go from there. So Fatma actually sent this great file over, and what I want to critique on is going to be one main thing. It's actually not going to be on the retouching entirely. Actually, no, I lie, it is. It's going to be on the flyaways here. The flyaways themselves, I think need more work because it's really distracting to me. I know this is always personal preference, but for me, when it catches the highlight like this, I definitely want to make sure that it gets taken care of. And over here, and here, and here, and over here. So it makes a huge difference. If you clean that up alone, it would look really, really nice. And again, like I mentioned before, it's all personal preference. But if you did want to clean it up, you could use the spot healing brush as well and just going over it. You have to have a version of Creative Cloud because the spot healing brush in conjunction with Content Aware works really, really well. Or you could use a clone brush. However, for me, the spot healing brush works really good with small little flyaways like that. Okay, great. The next thing I would consider is going to be this area here. That guy needs to go. It's always very distracting in shots when they forget to take off their wrist. So in that instance, you really do have to just get in there and clone a little by little. I shouldn't do that on the backdrop layer, but you know, what do you do? Okay, let's just use a new layer here. What do you do, you know? Okay, use a new layer. I'm going to clone that out. I'm just doing it step by step here. But you just go in there, and once you're done cloning, you then dodge and burn to actually blend in the areas that are not perfect. It's really interesting because normally when I'm retouching, I don't have people watching me for the first time trying to get everything right. This is where hopefully experience comes in and fixes a lot of things that I'm not sure of how to do. Which, believe it or not, there's many things that I look at, I'm like, I'm not sure how to do this, but I give it a shot, I play with it, and then see if it works. Right now I'm using a blank layer with a healing brush. I'm just healing away some of the weird texture that's happening. And then once that's done, I would go ahead and dodge and burn to even out any bits that are not looking right, especially because the background itself, especially because the tone and color and stuff will look different once you've healed and cloned. But you just want to use it to kind of blend it in here. But you get where I'm going with this. Then I'll also dodge and then fix anything that needs to be fixed. Then I come back to my clone brush and then just obviously fix out the rest of it. But this is a huge improvement getting rid of that area. And it's not perfect, just keep playing with it and then fix that. The next thing I will do is get rid of the redness. There's a red shift adjustment layer here. And I would do that and brush in the brush out the redness if there's any areas that are too red. I'd use that to do that. And again, the unifying skin tone tutorial is phenomenal, so I'll do that too. So there you go. And again, I would clone out this bit as well, if possible. Or maybe even take some of the hair and extend it this way. Let me see if that even works. Like so. And so you would have no idea that there was anything there. So if you're lazy, you just want to come here and clone a little bit of that hair in. Guess what? No one's gonna know the wiser except just me and you and everyone else watching. All right, so thank you so much, Fatma. Hope that helped. Let's go to our last image, and I know we have a lot more left in the queue, but I'll do another video as well in the future. Himali K sent this image in. This is so beautiful. I love this image. This is a beauty shot, and obviously this is taking a little bit more further than typical portraits, but beauty is that way in many respects. I do like it. I know Himali personally, and she dodges and burns a lot, and she does a really good job with it. Texture's also there. It's nice and uniform. Freckles are still there. That's how you can tell there was not a lot of anything frequency separation going on. The eyeshadow color is beautiful. It's nice and bronze. One thing I would fix though is the forehead is really bright. I would tone that down. I would either take my burn adjustment layer and just quickly tone that down just a little bit. And just, there you go. See, that's a lot better. It just evens it out with the rest of the face. It's too bright. If you ever want to see what something looks like if it's too bright or too dark, just use your black and white helper layer and you can see the area is sticking out in luminosity, and then you can tone that down. All right, well, aside from that, I would get rid of some green in the hands. There's some green happening there. Also, the hands are missing some shape. I would maybe burn some more shape in the knuckles. I know people think knuckles are really bad in the beauty world, but I personally don't mind knuckles, so I would enhance that a little bit more to give more shape in the hand itself. Just personal preference. But aside from that, really well done, Himali. All right, so aside from that, I had a lot of fun looking at your images and just taking a look at what everyone submitted. If you are completely new to this channel, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it because I want to update content more regularly, and subscriptions help me do that more often. And secondly, if you are looking forward to submitting your own images for critique, join the Photoshop with Pratik group, which I am going to be linking in the description, or the Sue Bryce Education group, which I'll also link in the description. And you can submit your images whenever I do post future castings for future critiques. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope to see you on the next one.